Awesome. Thank you so much. Good morning, almost afternoon technically. Thank you for joining our presentation, The Challenges of OER Assessment and Evaluation. I'm Adam Pilipshen. I'm the Assistant Director of Assessment, Evaluation, and Research in Student Affairs at Stony Brook University. I'm joined today by Dr. Samuel Abramovich from the University at Buffalo. Sam is an associate professor at UB, where he's also the head of their Open Educational Resources Lab. He's also my doctoral advisor and the collaborator on the research we'll be discussing today. So we're going to go over some large-scale data analysis and how it can address the challenges that threaten our ability to understand OER's true impact on student learning. Using research Sam and I are currently working on, our goal is to provide some ideas on how to better prove the contribution of OER while avoiding certain methodological criticisms. Specifically, we're going to look at a way in which observational studies can be conducted to minimize the impact of confounding variables, thus improving the quality of the causal inferences that could be made about OER's effectiveness. So OER benefits. There are many benefits to OER usage. My goal is not to enumerate them here. Others presenting at the summit can go into much further greater detail than I can. However, from a measurement standpoint, some benefits are easier to assess than others. For example, using a free open textbook as opposed to an expensive publisher one is a benefit that's easy to assess. You can survey all students in a program after the first week of classes and check to see who has their textbook and who doesn't. Simple and easy. Or you can set up a more informative study comparing class participation rates between online courses that use open textbooks and those that don't to see which students are off to the races sooner. Even the ability of an instructor to directly manipulate materials to the needs of students can be assessed in a somewhat straightforward manner. However, what is difficult to demonstrate is if OERs improve student knowledge acquisition. That's why, and this is why is this so difficult, you may ask? Well, for starters, other presenters have kind of addressed this. Given the many variables that influence student learning, like the teacher, like the school, like the subject area, we would need so much data spanning diverse contexts to be able to even approach any generalizable statements about OER's influence on student learning. And this is exactly the problem Sam and I are trying to tackle. Specifically, we sought to investigate if a teacher's use of OERs improves student grades and course completion rates. While we realized that these are only proxies for student knowledge acquisition, we knew from an assessment standpoint, we had to choose outcomes that would be important to any institution, administrator, or educator interested in investing time and resources into OER. From a measurement standpoint, these outcomes also had the added benefit of being universal across diverse institutions, subjects, and courses. Assessing benefits again. So why are we assessing the benefits of OERs on grades and course completion rates? It's been done before, right? Well, in fact, there have been plenty of great studies that suggest OERs do improve these measures of student learnings. OERs would probably not be as popular as they are today without the important contributions of these pioneering researchers. However, there are challenges to being first. These early studies often didn't have access to large samples. How could they? 10 years ago, teachers' knowledge of or access to OERs was a novelty. So studies were often small and domain specific, sometimes limited to investigating the use of one type of OER, say an open textbook, in one type of course. But why is this a problem? Well, if I try to sell you on OERs by citing a study showing how an open textbook improved course grades in a psychology course at a community college, you might say, well, Adam, I teach anatomy and physiology at an R1 university. How does that apply to me? Or if I told you there's this other study that suggests student enrollment in online courses that used OER were likely to earn a passing grade than students in online courses that didn't use OER, you might say, well, I teach face-to-face courses, Adam. So while we owe a lot to these, small domain-specific studies, they still leave a lot of unanswered questions for most of us. But there have been studies that have evaluated the impact of OERs across different schools and courses, and these too have suggested OERs do improve grades and completion rates. However, these were observational studies where the researcher didn't control for confounding variables. In some of these studies, one of the biggest influences on student learning, the teacher, was not controlled for. So does a study that demonstrates that OER led to higher completion rates, what does it show? Or does it show that certain teachers are just better and just also happen to use OER? And what if class size, whether the course was taught online or in person, or whether the teacher was teaching one class that semester or 8, or if they were teaching for 20 years or 2? See, there are so many variables that, if not accounted for, can muddle our ability to better understand OER's true impact on student learning. So given these obstacles, what can we do? How could we even go about assessing the impact of OER in a more generalizable and defensible manner? Well, that requires data. You would need lots of data. So much data that can span schools and context, so much data that you account for those important confounding variables. So I was pretty lucky when an opportunity presented itself to look deeper into the impact of OER on student learning when Sam invited me to assist him in assessing OER's effectiveness at a large university system. And because the data set he had access to was massive, we knew we would be able to assess OER across numerous schools, instructors, and course types. In total, the data set spanned over 50 institutions, 200,000 instructors, 2.5 million sections, 23 semesters, 1,000 different course types, and contained almost 30 variables, one of which was an indicator noting if the course was taught primarily using open educational resources or not. The sheer size of this data set, with all of its different schools and all of its different courses and all of its different teachers and all of these different variables, like course size, like whether a course was taught online or in person, would allow us to better arrive at insights that were more definitely not domain specific. However, despite this great opportunity, we know that we wanted to say something meaningful and defensible about the impact of OER. And to do so, certain methodological considerations need to be made to account for any confounding variables. While I can't say the name, you could probably guess what university system the data came from. So huge data set, great. Getting the data ready for analysis, not so great. A lot of data validation, a lot of preparation. For one, we need to standardize course names across schools, as most schools use slightly different naming conventions for the exact same type of course. And even the CIP codes, couldn't be trusted because it's all on the school to properly report that up. Remember, we're talking about 1,000 different types of courses, so that was a lot of renaming. Another challenging part in the data prep process was we had to work through and identify what was good data and bad data. We found that even a data set provided by the university system and schools that helped generate it can't be trusted at face value alone. For example, we came across several 3 and 4 credit courses that had over 50 students in them, where the average course grade was 0. Turns out that these were canceled courses that made it into the data and had to be removed. Because after all, why would you want to compare actual course outcome data with data that was associated with some reporting glitch? After a whole bunch of data prep steps that I won't bore you with, but anyone that's worked with data knows that most of your time is cleaning the data, less time is actually spent analyzing it. We had to identify a meaningful sample. To increase our sample size and thus statistical power, we obviously had to select courses that had many OER sections. As it turns out, the courses that used OER the most were the same general education courses students ended up taking the most. These are courses like freshman composition and statistics, to name just a few. Considering success or failure in these courses often sets the stage for a student's college experience, we knew we arrived at a sample that was important to analyze. So after we homed in on our sample, what do we do next? Do we just do a simple t-test between courses that used OERs and courses that didn't use OERs and just call it a? Well, no, because there was one final challenge we needed to overcome. We still had to minimize the influence of those pesky confounding covariates, like instructor. Because again, if we didn't and found that OER courses have higher completion rates than non-OER courses, it would be hard to determine what was the OER and what was the instructor. Again, maybe the best instructors, the ones that would really do anything to help their students, like save them money on expensive textbook, also happen to use OERs. So what if we observe the worst though? That OERs had lower grades than non-OER courses. Could we just say that, hey, OERs are bad, stop using them? Well, maybe the courses that were more likely to use OERs were also more likely to have the highest amounts of students in them. Is it the OERs that are causing the lower grades, or the fact that the class has an overworked instructor trying to keep up with the demands of a class that's just busting at the seams? So how do we overcome these problems? Well, we used a method called propensity score matching. Propensity score matching is a method that's gained a lot of popularity in social sciences in recent years. It's a quasi-experimental method that allows the researcher to create synthetic treatment and control groups that are of similar characteristics so that you can truly compare, apples to apples. But it's not like a magic wand that we can just wave over our data set and like voila. To use the technique, we first needed to understand if and how the various covariates in the data were related to our outcome variables and our treatment variable. Our treatment variable being if a course used OER or did not. So this required a deep dive into both the literature and our data to see how the variables related in theory and in actuality. For example, does course size predict course grades? What does the research say? What does our data suggest? Does course size predict OER usage? What does the research say? What does our data suggest? Does the instructor teaching history predict course grade? Research, data, does it predict OER usage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, ad infinitum. We had to do this for every potential influential variable. And after we identified and found a list of these good confounders or bad confounders, however you frame it, we still had to see if they were appropriate for the courses we were going to evaluate. For example, if there was only one anatomy and physiology course in our data that happened to be online, we shouldn't match OER and non-OER A&P courses on whether they were online and not. There wouldn't be no corresponding sample, because if the online course was using an OER, we would need to find another online course that wasn't using an OER to compare them. And if there's only one online course, there's nothing to compare it to. After we rechecked these variables with all the courses in our sample, we then generated what's called the propensity score. So in this specific case, you can think of the propensity score like a probability a course is going to use or not use OER, given the set of variables we identified. We then use these scores to match OER courses with their non-OER counterpart. Again, the proverbial apples to apples. So now online stats courses with 50 students taught by new teachers that were using OERs would be compared to online stats courses with 50 students taught by new teachers that were not using OERs. We balance on a lot more variables than that, but you get the idea. So almost mimicking random assignment, we created treatment courses that are using OER and control groups, courses that aren't using OER, that were balanced on every important covariate we identified. And because of this matching, we could more accurately impact the estimate of OER on grades and completion rates. So what's next for us? Well, we're at the final stages of our analysis, not quite done yet. But we're at the time where we're going to start answering these research questions. Specifically, what impact, if any, does OER have on course grades or completion rates? To do so, we'll probably be using some sort of regression approach with what's called cluster robust standard errors. This method will allow us to say something more universal about OER effectiveness, given our data are clustered. And what I mean by clustered is like courses are nested with the teachers that are teaching them, teachers are nested in schools. However, we still might analyze the influence of school on the effectiveness of OER, because after all, every school has slightly different, implementation of OERs. So if we go down that route, we'll probably use some sort of multi-level modeling approach to evaluate the random effects, the influence of the school or influence of the program in which the course is situated in. So soon we'll be shedding some new light on the impact of OERs on student grades and completion rates. These insights will definitely not be domain specific. So in the meantime, kind of wrapping up, what might you consider for your research? Well, if your study is observational and has a treatment like ours, where we didn't have control over who got OER, who didn't get OER, you might consider looking at propensity score matching. Like as an example, say your school wanted to assess the effectiveness of a freshman seminar course, but this is an optional course. Students don't have to take it. How would you set up such a study? We just compare first year GPAs to those that took the course to those that didn't. What happens if you did and found that those that did take the course had higher GPAs? Was it the freshman seminar course? Was it something else? Maybe there's something to be special to be said about the type of student that registers and pays for a course that they don't have to take. And that course is about how to be a good student. I don't know about you, but maybe they were a good student beforehand. So congratulations, you just found some variables that you have to control for, like high school academic performance. So you might want to check out propensity score matching. But brace yourself, you'll have to get intimate with your data and the literature if you want to say something defensible. Anyway, so that kind of marks the end of our presentation. Thank you for joining. I'm not sure if there's time for questions. I think Sam said he may have addressed some stuff in the chat if need be. But if you have any questions about our research or propensity score matching, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to share some insights or guidance. Our contact information I'll show on the last slide. When these slides share out, there's some citations at the end, and one of them, the fourth paper down, does a deep dive on propensity score matching, but it makes it very accessible. So that's about it. I shall look at the chat. Don't know if there's any questions I have to. Please feel free to reach out to us. This work is, I owe a lot to kind of Sam. While I'm like a data guy and know all these methods, Sam is my sounding board, being an actual educator, guiding this. So you look forward to some substantial findings, important findings pretty soon. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Adam and Sam. We appreciate your time.